Daf Yomi, Batra, page 157b. Top of the page with the words Elah Hamani. Elah Hamani, Rabbi Meir, he damra adam makned av shlab. Rather, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? This Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says a person can transfer ownership of an entity that has not yet come into the world. Similarly, Rabbi Meir maintains that one can place a lien on property that the buyer will subsequently acquire. That the buyer will acquire. The buyer will acquire. Every single day I say the buyer will acquire. Hey, Amar Rav Yaakov, Minahar Pekod. Bishmei de Rabino, Toshima. Shetre Chayva Mugnomin, Pesulin, Vamachuchalin, Kesherin. Rabbi Yaakov from Nahar Pekod says, reminds me of Pekod Pekadati. Nahar Pekod. I like that one. Let's see here. What's the Gemash of Nahar Pekod? Into the realms of Nahar Pekod. Nahar Pekodi. Nahar Pekodi. Oh, we don't have time to mess around here. 445. Nahar Pekod. Alright. Rabbi Yaakov from Nahar Pekod says in the name of Ravina, come and hear proof from the Mishnah in Shavi'it 10.5. Promissory notes that are antedated, meaning that they are dated prior to the date on which the loan actually was given, are invalid. This is because the promissory note placed a lien on the borrower's property. By dating the document earlier than the loan itself, the lender appears to have a lien on a property that the borrower sold prior to taking out the loan, enabling the lender to fraudulently repossess it from the buyer. But the promissory notes that are post-dated are valid, as this does not enable the lender to defraud a buyer. The Gemara explains, if it enters your mind to say that property that the borrower acquires after receiving the loan is not liened, even when he writes the property that I will acquire shall be liened, and he acquires property and sells it to others, or when he writes the property that I will acquire shall be liened, and he acquires property and bequeaths it to his heirs, why then are post-dated promissory notes valid? They should be invalid, as in some instances they enable the creditor to fraudulently repossess property that is not liened. For example, if the borrower acquires property after receiving a loan, but before the date on the promissory note, and if he sells it after, and he sells it after that date, this case is comparable to one where the borrower writes the property that I will acquire shall be liened. Hamani, Rabbi Meir, Amar Adamakne, Davar Shelo B'Olam. The Gemara answers in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah. The Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says a person can, yes, he can transfer ownership of an entity that has not yet come into the world. Rav Misharshia says in the name of Rava, come and give proof from Batra with regard to collecting a debt in the case of enhancement of land. How does it happen that the debt cannot be collected from lien property that has been sold? This question arises in a case where a debtor sold a field to another and the buyer enhanced it, and the creditor came and repossessed it from the buyer. When the buyer collects from the value of the land of the seller, he collects the principal even from lien property that was sold to others, but he collects the value of the enhancement only from unsold property. And if it enters your mind to say that property that the buyer acquires after receiving the loan is not lien even when he writes the property that I will acquire shall be liened, and he acquires property and sells it to others, or when he writes, the property that I will acquire shall be liened, and he acquires property and bequeaths it to his heirs, why does the creditor collect his debt by repossessing the enhancement from the buyer? Since the enhancement was not extant at the time of the loan, it is not liened. Hamani, Rabbi Meiri, the Gemara answers in accordance with those opinions of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is according to the opinion of Rabbi Meiri, who says a person can, yes he can, transfer ownership of an entity that has not yet come into the world. The dilemma of Shmuel is raised according to the opinion of the rabbis. Im tim salam nikana macha nikana v'hoyerish l'mishtabed hola mishtabed im tim salam mishtabed loive v'loive v'chaza v'kane mahu lekam mishtabed or levas mishtabed. The Gemara comments, if you say that when the borrower writes the property that I will acquire shall be liened, and he acquires property and sells it to others, it is not liened, and that when he writes the property that I will acquire shall be liened, and he acquires property and bequeaths it to his heirs, it is not liened, then it is not liened. And lean on me, and it reminds me of that song. And the following question will not arise if you say that it is liened. What is the halacha with regard to one who borrowed money from one lender and then borrowed money from another lender, starting in both cases, the property that he will acquire shall be liened, and then acquire land? Does the first lender have a lien upon the property, or does the last lender have a lien upon the property? Amar Rav Nachman, Hamilsi Boilan, Ushalechu mitam, Rishon Kane, Rav Hunamar Yachaloiku, Chein Tane Rabbi Baravu, Yachaloiku, Amar Ravina Madura Kamo Derav Ashi, Amarlan Rishon Kane, Madura Basra Derav Ashi, Amarlan Yachaloiku. Rabbi Nachman said this matter was raised before us, and the sages said the response from there, from Eretz Yisrael, the first lender acquires the property, since his lien came first. Rav Huna says the lenders divide the property between them, and so teaches Rabbi Baravu, the lenders divide the property between them. Ravina said the first time Rav Ashi taught this matter, he said to us, the first lender acquires the property. The last time Rav Ashi taught this matter to us, he said to us, the lenders divide the property between them. And the halacha is that they divide the property between them. The Gemara raised an objection from the aforementioned Braise with regard to collecting a debt in a case of enhancement of land. How does it occur that the debt cannot be collected from liened property that has been sold? This question arises in a case where one sold a field to another, and the buyer enhanced it, and the creditor came and repossessed it from the buyer. When the buyer collects the value of the land from the seller, he collects the principal even from liened property that was sold to others, but he collects the value of the enhancement only from unsold property. And if it is so that in general the property is divided between the creditors, then since both the creditor and the buyer have a lien upon the enhancement of the property, the buyer should collect only half of the value of the enhancement. My goive nami diktani chati shebach. The Gemara answers, what does the Braita mean as well when it teaches that the buyer collects the enhancement? The Braita means that he collects half of the value of the enhancement.